Hello everyone, this will be part 1 of chapter 19 of Regular Boy Daniel Wayne, written by Diamond Rosie and read by Insect Overlord. This chapter is titled Timothy Drake's Guide to Making Friends. Sure, Tim had his reservations about Danny. More accurately, Tim had reservations about Damien's blood brother, as the Dracula spawn himself would phrase it. But the week and a half Danny'd been there, Tim was more conscious of when Danny wasn't with him than when he was. Pattering down the stairs, Tim made his way to the kitchen. It had been the first weekend in a while that he'd gotten to sleep in, and Tim had enjoyed every moment of his slumber. He walked past Bruce at the head of the table, reading his newspaper to grab his breakfast. When Tim took his usual seat, food in hand, Bruce looked up from his paper. "Good morning, Tim," he greeted. Tim just nodded in his direction. He looked at the empty seat on Tim's left. "Where's Danny?" Tim looked at him indignantly. "What am I, a Danny tracker?" Bruce said nothing. Tim huffed. "Do you not pay attention? He's meeting with his hockey team today." He'd told them at the dinners that had become more frequent since his arrival. "Oh, yes, he mentioned that." Bruce nodded, returning to his paper. Tim rolled his eyes. Danny wouldn't be back till later in the afternoon, meaning it was the perfect time for Tim to work on his new software upgrades to his suit. Long since finished with his project, Tim wandered the manor bored. Based on traffic around this time of day and distance from the manor, there was still 43 minutes until Danny arrived. What did Tim usually do with his free time? Maybe he should go train. Tim found the nearest gym and pushed open the double doors, surprised to find Damien already inside. He wasn't wearing his usual training gear, opting instead for a more casual approach of athletic pants, t-shirt, and running shoes. He was drenched in sweat, his hair sticking to his forehead instead of its gel-spiked style. Damien's head snapped in his direction at the sound of the door opening. Tim barely had time to notice the soccer ball a few feet away from him, and the goal set up at the corner of the gym. "Leave," Damien demanded. Tim was saving the picture he had snuck of Danny and Damien in the garden the other day for the optimal moment of revelation. Without another word, Tim left. Danny had gotten home 14 minutes later than Tim had predicted, because he had stopped to grab a milkshake on his way home. Tim should have accounted for that. Danny never turned down milkshakes. Tim had already paced the front of the main entrance 16 times before he caught sight of the car that had driven him off in the morning. "Oh, hey, Danny," Tim waved casually. Danny looked up from his phone, surprised to see Tim there. "Hey, Tim," he smiled. "What's up?" "Oh, nothing. I was just walking by, you know. Daily dose of sunshine." Tim stuffed his hands in his pocket. Danny looked up at the cloudy sky. He nodded in acceptance of the information. "I'm going to hit the showers," gesturing towards the front door. "Cool. Yeah, see you later." Tim nodded. "We can hang out if you're free, and I'm free, 'cause I totally have, a ton of stuff to do." Danny waved with a laugh as he disappeared down the hallway. Okay, shower. 19 minutes. Then he'd probably grab some food, based on his average eating rate. Tim estimated another 23 minutes. Today was a Saturday, so chances were Danny would probably postpone his homework till tomorrow. But on the off chance that he did a portion of it today, then that would be another... The sound of slurping behind him distracted him from his mental calculations. Turning around, Tim faced Steph, who sat leisurely on a lawn chair sipping lemonade. Tim blinked. "How long have you been there?" They didn't have lawn chairs. Alfred hated lawn chairs. "Long enough," she said, a large smirk on her face. "Big world out there, little guy." Whatever," Tim said, annoyed, heading back inside. Tim plopped himself on the sofa a few seats down from Duke, who was heavily engrossed in his video game. Tim watched the screen absent-mindedly until Duke either finished the level or died. The other boy turned to him, the controller limp in his lap now. "I thought Danny was home," he asked. "He is." Tim tried to sound offhanded. Duke gave him a confused brow. "You guys get into a fight or something?" "What gives you that impression?" Tim smiled cheerily. The confusion on Duke's face proved he had not been convincing enough. "You know," he said, changing the topic, "when you and Danny first started hanging out, I'll admit I might have been a bit annoyed." Based on his averted eyes and hesitant posture, annoyed was not the most accurate word. Instead of pointing that out, he asked, "What are you talking about?" Duke shrugged easily. "I mean, you have, like, Teen Titans and the Young Justice. You're kind of friends, you know? I kind of thought, meta to meta, that Danny would be, like, my guy." Tim wasn't entirely sure what Duke was talking about. "Like, my backup, guy in the chair. But I guess he would have to, you know." Duke gestured to his chest, alluding to the yellow bat-shaped insignia that wasn't currently there. "No." "Duke, we can't involve," Tim started, spouting the same explanation he'd been giving himself like a mantra for the past few days. Yeah, I know," Duke waved him off dismissively. "But I get it now. You and Danny," his hand waved in the air like he was trying to grasp the word. "You guys are like the same kind of unhinged." His dreadlocks moved slightly with the self-satisfied nod he gave Tim. "I guess I never noticed before how often you would have to stop to explain things or defend your ideas until you didn't have to." Tim blinked at him. "It's nice that you have a friend like that, Tim, and I'm happy for you." Tim digested Duke's words, cross-examining them with the conversations he'd had with Danny before. Was that the reason talking to Danny about his ideas was easier than if it were Connor or Bart? Tim told them almost everything, but discussing his concept ideas or random theories was just tolerated, not explored, like with Danny. A moment passed, and Duke returned to his game. Tim turned down the controller he'd been offered. "You guys are like the same kind of unhinged. It's nice that you have a friend like that, Tim. It's nice that you have a friend like that. It's nice that you have a friend." Friend. Were Tim and Danny friends? Tim had been so concerned with trying to establish himself so that Danny wouldn't try to take advantage of him the way Damien had. Looking back, Tim couldn't pinpoint the moment he stopped. Tim hadn't even noticed that Danny had become his friend, like an actual friend, and not the various teenagers he used to maintain his public image. Tim thought back to the hours he'd spent in his lab working on various projects. Tim was Red Robin, the previous Robin. He knew how to keep a cover, how to pick out clues from people to know things about them that they didn't know about themselves. Tim knew how to keep the mask on, even when he wasn't physically wearing one. You guys are like the same kind of unhinged. Tim only now realized he hadn't been wearing a mask. The only reason he had never told Danny that he was Red Robin, other than the very heavy rule that Bruce had hung over all their heads, was because he didn't need to. It didn't matter that Tim was Red Robin. It didn't matter that he was Timothy Drake Wayne. Tim, for the first time since he had picked up the camera and followed Batman and Robin through Gotham, was Tim. Just Tim. Danny was Tim's friend, but Tim needed to make sure he was Danny's friend, too. He would need to figure out how to seem reliable and trustworthy without relying on his alter ego. One of Tim's best skills was research, and his newest mission required it. By the time Danny joined Tim and Duke, Tim had successfully come up with a step-by-step plan to ensure that Danny would be his friend. Step 1. Be inclusive. According to Tim's research, people like to feel appreciated and wanted, even if not required. If done successfully, then the other person would be more likely to feel comfortable in each other's presence, and thus more likely to establish an amicable relationship. When he heard Danny's footsteps wandering down the hallway, Tim knew it was go time. Quickly, he pulled the plug on the console before plugging it back in. "Dude!" Duke gasped, shocked, when the screen suddenly went black. "I was about to win!" "It's for a mission, Duke," Tim hissed quietly. Just in time, as Danny turned into the game room, The logo of the console danced on the screen. "Hey guys," Danny greeted with a smile. He waved at Duke, who only stared at Tim dumbfounded. "Oh, hey Danny, you're just in time." Tim grabbed the first controller his hand reached from the drawer. "We were just about to play, Tim tried to find the title card. "Doomable 4, Duke supplied dryly from the couch. "Doomable 4, Tim nodded. "Would you like to join us?" The research had said to leave the invitation open but assertive, so they didn't feel like an afterthought, hence why the restarting was required. Now Danny would feel like he had arrived at the best time to join, and be inclined to join. "Sure," Danny nodded slowly. "I've only played 1 and 2, though. Is it a lot different?" "Not really," Duke shrugged, as Danny made his way to the extra controllers. "You'd miss a bit of the lore from 3, but I can fill you in." Duke was a good ally, but Tim wouldn't be upstaged. Agreeing, Danny grabbed the first controller his hand landed on. About a year and a half ago, the controller wars had gotten to the point of no return, and Bruce had invested in custom controllers for each of their personas, so they wouldn't fight. Tim looked at the blue controller Danny had in his hand. Nightwing's version of the bat symbol etched onto each joystick, and black accents on its handles. Tim looked at Danny with a carefully blank face. Danny blinked at him in confusion, as they both looked back down at the controller in unison, and then back up at each other. Danny's lip twitched. "What?" he asked innocently. "Nothing." Tim forced a smile, eyes darting up to the controller in his hand. Silently, Danny put the controller back and shuffled around for a while before finding one with Wonder Woman's logo etched onto it. He showed it to Tim, appraisingly. Tim wordlessly returned to his seat, Red Robin controller in hand. "Let's just play the game." "You aren't playing, Steph?" Danny asked to the top of the bookshelf. "No, I'm good up here," Steph waved with a laugh. Cass huddled in next to her. "How long have you guys been there?" Duke asked, surprised. "Long enough." Steph threw a chip in her mouth. Tim refused to address her. Step 2. Listen and show interest. According to Tim's research, most people enjoyed being listened to and to feel like their interests are shared. Tim predicted this would be easy enough, considering that he and Danny already shared many interests. They both enjoyed video games, building things, and designing new projects. Danny had shown Tim how he planned to have his new room designed. Tim had given a few pointers based on his experience with the cave, Barrow, and various other secret bases he'd visited. Danny took them in stride, not questioning how Tim was privy to that kind of knowledge. They spent hours in Tim's workshop building things together. There was only one thing that Danny was really passionate about that Tim had never been very interested in: hockey. Danny, Tim, and Steph were waiting for Alfred to pick them up from school. Duke had already left for patrol, and Cass, Tim wasn't sure where she was. Steph was busy tapping away at her phone, and he and Danny stood in comfortable silence. This was the perfect time to strike Tim. "So," he drawled, trying to sound candid, "how's hockey going?" Danny looked up at him, shielding his eyes from the fall sun, surprise clear in his blue-gray eyes. "It's good," he said hesitantly, waiting for Tim to elaborate. Crap. What do you do in hockey? Tim should have done his research. "Do you, think, Tim? Have games?" he tried. Steph snickered at him from her spot a few feet away. Danny blinked at him before a smile cracked his look of confusion. "Not yet," he explained. "Qualifiers start this Friday. Qualifiers mean you compete against all the other Gotham teams. After that, the team that wins plays for Gotham against all the other cities for the state championship." Tim nodded along. "Then, if we can get that far, it's national championships." Tim bobbed his head, trying to digest the information. "What team do you play for, then?" "Arctic Foxes," Danny said. "Friday's match is against the Gotham Bats." After a moment, "I play number 17. Maybe the Foxes will see an anonymous donation soon. Not that it would be Tim, because Danny definitely wouldn't appreciate him doing that. Tim wouldn't do something Danny would be opposed to. His research was very clear about that. Danny continued as a familiar black car rolled closer where they stood. Apparently, the Bats usually win state, so it's a pretty intense qualifier. They slid into the car. Tim blinked at that. Somehow he had forgotten that Danny had only been in Gotham for 2 weeks. He wouldn't know about the local teams like the other players would. Well, Tim didn't know either, but that was more from a lack of interest. He would need to do a thorough background search on all the players to make sure they weren't suspicious. Maybe he should ask Danny's opinion first to see how he feels about the new team members. How's your team, then? They're pretty good. I got to be center forward, so we're practicing on, team integration and all that. Honestly, I was kind of surprised they put me in the second line. Figured I'd have to be a fourth or something for a while since I haven't played in a few years. Danny pratted on easily, fixing his bag by his feet before turning to face Tim. Danny laughed at the confused expression painted on Tim's face. Forwards are like an offensive position. We strike and try to score and stuff. Defenders, pretty obviously, defend against the opponent. And then the goaltender. There's 6 players on the ice at a time, he explained easily. Oh, so you play offensive? Tim summarized, not correcting Danny's misunderstanding of his question. Danny nodded. There was a quiet nervousness when he spoke again. You can come to the game on Friday, if you want to see, he shrugged, trying to seem nonchalant. Tim did want to see. I'll be there. Step 3. Share information. Tim's research had clarified that only one person sharing information to the other was a sign of emotional imbalance and was something to be avoided as much as possible. Tim was extra aware of this because of the length everyone had gone through to hide their vigilante personas. As the car pulled up to the front entrance of the manor, Danny invited Tim to his newly finished room after school. He had helped Danny design the room, so he was excited to see how it turned out. The ceiling in the room was about 40 feet high, and Danny had used this to his advantage by installing a faux second floor to his room. The bottom floor had been the usual setup: bed, TV, and a showcase of various space-themed memorabilia Danny had collected. The second floor, though, was a complete switch-up to that. Its flooring was a tinted glass, so from above, the entire bottom floor was visible, but the top floor was nearly hidden from view. There was a ring of floorless area where a ring around the stairs led upstairs, and also the only spot that gave the bottom floor view of the top. The top floor was rigged with all the lab equipment Tim had, like a 3D printer, large wall computer, holographic table on one end, and a regular work table on the other. The tour had concluded with both boys sitting on Danny's floor, divulging in all the minor details Danny had thought to include. So, Danny asked after a lull of silence, "What are you thinking?" Eyes absent-mindedly taking in the intricacies of the avant-garde ceiling. This was the perfect opening Tim had been waiting for. Taking the opportunity, when I was little, my parents were always busy with work. They were archaeologists, and I never even knew what country they were in. Danny's head turned, and his brows scrunched in confusion, blinking slowly. They hired help to manage the house while they were gone, but I was mostly on my own. I didn't have a nanny or anything, and I was homeschooled, so the tutors would all just come by when they were scheduled. Danny nodded slowly. I don't think I ever left Drake Manor until I was 7 and just decided that I could leave. I mean, there wasn't really anyone to stop me, which, in hindsight, was totally something a 7-year-old should not be allowed to do. But I would go around Gotham on my little bicycle and overhyped camera to take pictures of the city. I remember the first time I saw Batman and Robin fight off some thugs. I tried to take a picture, but my flash was on, and they totally saw me, and the thugs got away. I kind of felt bad about that, but I was way more scared that Batman would arrest me or something. But he just asked Robin to take me back home while he went to catch the thugs. Pretty sure that was Nightwing before he became Nightwing. Tim tried to play into the uncertainty. He took me to get fries and a milkshake, and it was the first time I'd ever had fast food, And then on the way home, he gave me a huge, long lecture about how Gotham's not safe out at night, and I shouldn't be out on my own. Tim took a breath, thinking of ways to conceal how this led to him to his own Robin costume. Danny listened intently. I listened for like a week. Tim paused. Actually, I think it was like 3 days, and I'd done all the research I could on them. Looking back, I was definitely obsessed. It went on for years, and I even tried to crack a few code cases to get their attention, which I totally did. Tim puffed his chest out in pride. They were like years old, too. Did you ever get a chance then? Danny whispered, taking in all the details Tim offered him. Chance for what? Danny didn't answer right away. A chance to work with Batman and Robin. Tim turned to him, eyes peering into Danny's eyes, searching. His eyes wandered around, not looking at Tim's, but there was a look on Danny's face that he couldn't ignore, like he was waiting for the ball to drop. Did Tim have to lie? He either lied and preserved the secret Bruce had explicitly told him to keep, or he told the truth and Danny would know that he was Red Robin, and, by consequence, air out all the others too. Originally, they agreed to keep the secret because they hadn't fully trusted Danny, which was not the case anymore. And Tim agreed with Bruce's point that if Danny knew they were the Bats and got seen with them too often, it would put a target on his back. Or, worse, he might try to join them. And from what Tim knew about Danny, he would definitely try to join them. But if Tim denied it, it would be a lie. Was Tim ready to lie to Danny? Lying had never been difficult for him. In fact, sometimes it came easier than telling the truth. But in the whole 2 weeks they'd known each other, Tim was vividly aware that this would be the first proper lie he told Danny. He wondered how substantial it would be. Would he have to go the rest of his life not telling him? What if they eventually told him? Then Danny would know that they'd all explicitly lied to him. That Tim had lied to his face, point blank. The tension of the matter weighed on Tim, and the silence of him not answering had almost become deafening. Danny pushed himself to his forearms, with a laugh that rippled through the swirling thoughts of Tim's mind. What are you even talking about, man? I meant, like, what you think of the room. Danny loosely gestured around them. The laugh didn't have the airlessness that Danny's laugh always had. Tim didn't comment on that fact. Oh, he let himself look embarrassed. Danny's fake laugh turned genuine for a moment before he went somber again. I get it, he said quietly. My parents were pretty busy all the time, too. It was part of the reason they put me and my sister into so many clubs when we were younger. It changed when I was 15, though. Danny's voice was delicate, and Tim knew it wasn't something he enjoyed talking about often. The invisible guilt chewed at Tim, but he pushed it aside. What happened? He asked curiously, letting the conversation trail away from his dilemma. Danny pressed his lips together, looking anywhere but at Tim. We took a trip to Chicago. It was after my sister left for college, so, just the 3 of us. Tim could hear the emotion Danny was fighting back, and he wanted to ask. Tim wanted to ask what happened to Danny in Chicago. He wanted to ask why Danny looked terrified just at the memory of it. He wanted to know what his sister leaving had to do with it. Tim wanted to know what happened when Danny was 15, but he couldn't ask, because he was Red Robin, and his research said that information imbalance led to a deteriorated relationship. Tim wanted to know, but more than that, Tim wanted Danny to be his friend, so he didn't ask. This concludes the first part of Chapter 19 of Regular Boy Daniel Wayne. The next part of this chapter should be up soon. Thank you so much for listening.